Hello, boxing fans. Welcome to another episode of World Championship Boxing. And today we are talking about the greatest performances of Sumbu Kalambay. And I'm joined once again by Juan Silva. How you doing, man?
Hey, good afternoon, Logan. And yes, you did say his name correctly, Sumbu Kalambay, born in the Belgian Congo, but his parents moved him at a young age to Italy. He grew up and learned how to fight in Italy and spent the rest of his career and life. He still resides there in Italy today. Sumbu Kalambay, one of the most underrated middleweight champions in the history of the middleweight division. In my opinion, the second greatest division in the history of boxing when it comes to talent after the welterweight division.
Let's talk about the three fights that we're going to talk about here.
All right, his fight, October 1987, against Bronx native and one of the most exciting brawlers of the 1980s and early 90s, Iran the Blade BARKLEY, in which all of Sumbu's boxing talent was on display in that fight. Then from there, one of the biggest upsets of 1988 and the signature career of Sumbu's career, March 5th, 1988, against one of the greatest fighters of all time, the greatest fighter ever come out of Jamaica, the body snatcher, Mike McCallum, and the last fight, November 8th, 1988, against tough man Doug DeWitt.
Okay, so let's talk about his early career.
All right, well, basically the first, I say, 20 to 25 fights of his career all took place in Italy. He was an Italian fighter, and he won the European title on about 2 or 3 occasions. Lost it to Ayub Kaluli, another very good African fighter. Ayub Kaluli was from Uganda, I believe. Yes, he was from Uganda. One of the main reasons that a lot of these African fighters went to Denmark, Ayub Kaluli went to Denmark and Italy, was because of the hazardous regimes and dictatorships that they were in the Congo and in Uganda. So they got out at the right time. After losing to Kaluli, he regained the European title by beating Harold Graham, who was one of the best British middleweights of the 1980s. And that fight earned him a shot to fight for the vacant WBA middleweight championship October 23rd, 1987, a title that was stripped from Marvin Hagler before he lost to Sugar Ray Leonard April 6, 1987.
And this is the first fight we're going to talk about here.
Yes, October 23rd, 1987, against Iran BARKLEY for the vacant WBA middleweight championship.
Now talk about where BARKLEY was in his career at this point.
At this point in time, BARKLEY was considered one of the best young American fighters. BARKLEY, from the Bronx, fought most of his career at that point in time, either in Atlantic City or Madison Square Garden, the Felt Forum in New York. After winning a couple of tough fights, one being against Jorge Amparo, he was able to get this title shot for the vacant title against Kalambay. And going into this fight, my father and I figured BARKLEY had no shot against Kalambay because we knew Kalambay was an excellent boxer, and BARKLEY's biggest problem was against guys that could move. If you stood in front of him, he could outslug you. But if you had movement and could box, he was in trouble. And this fight showed that exactly. The first 2 rounds, Kalambay danced, moved, and behind a beautiful jab, just outboxed BARKLEY. In the 3rd round, BARKLEY staggered Kalambay with a beautiful right cross, and I gave BARKLEY the 3rd round. That will be the last round he got for a long time. Because beginning with the 4th round, Kalambay mixed boxing in and out and was just boxing beautifully. Rounds 4 to 10 completely dominated BARKLEY by using that beautiful jab of his. Kalambay, and my father made a point of this, because my father always, and I've talked about this many a time, my father was a stickler for wasted movement. He hated when guys that boxed just moved to move, just ran to run. He hated that. If you're going to move, my father said, you got to move with a purpose. You got to move to, A, make the man miss, and B, set yourself up offensively. Well, that's what he was doing from rounds 4 to 10. He moved behind that jab, and he would get out of the way of Barkley's wild rights and lefts. And from rounds 4 to 10, he put on a boxing clinic. In the 11th round, he finally stunned Barkley and had almost knocked Barkley down. Batted Barkley in the 11th round. From rounds 12 to 14, he batted Barkley from pillar to post. Barkley, it was a tough son of a gun, a great chin, was hard to knock out. And after 14 rounds, I had Kalambay winning 13 of the 14 rounds. In the 15th rounds, shockingly, Barkley, who had nothing left, came out and tried to knock out Kalambay. He came forward and landed several shots. The only problem, Logan, was he had nothing on those shots. He was able to outland and outfight Kalambay in the 15th and final round, but it was too little, too late, as Kalambay won an easy 15-round decision and now was the new WBA middleweight champion. Kalambay was a better fighter than Barkley. He might have not been known by the casual boxing fans and the media, and Barkley was a bigger name because he was coming out of New York, and Kalambay was an African coming out of Italy. But Kalambay was the better fighter. They fight 100 times. Kalambay beats Barkley 100 times. He's just a better boxer. Barkley was tailor-made for Kalambay's counter-punching, and that jab was just in Barkley's face the whole night.
So he was favored to win, Kalambay was?
If memory serves me correct, while watching this fight with my father, I believe he was.
Okay, because he said, I read, this was his toughest fight.
I don't agree with that. I mean, Barkley was a tough son of a gun, no doubt, and he kept coming. And maybe it was tough for Kalambay because he had to keep moving, and he had to land so many punches, and he only hurt Barkley once. But his fights with McCallum and Steve Collins later on were much tougher than this fight with Iran Barkley, in my opinion.
I think he won more rounds in this fight, but in terms of just keeping up with Barkley's heart, it must have been tough because he had a lot of heart.
Barkley was taking a horrific beating from Tommy Hearns in their first fight a few months later in June of 88, and was bloodied and ready to go, and caught Hearns with a desperate double right cross and put Hearns to sleep. Barkley was a tough son of a gun to put away. But if you could box and stay away and not slug with Barkley, you'd win. But Barkley was tough, no doubt. And Kalambay had to earn his victory because remember, this was 1987, the last year that WBA sanctioned 15-round fights. This was one of the last 15-round fights in WBA history.
Yeah, it was a classic fight. It was also just a war. I mean, even though it was pretty one-sided, Barkley wasn't ready to give it up. I mean, he was going to fight to the last bell.
Barkley fought every fight like you were stealing from him. So he was going to give you hell.
Yeah, he was a fucking bull.
He was a bull.
Here you see the differences in the way you hold your hands. I thought Kalambay's his hand positioning is so perfect that he never changes. You know, he never drops his hands. They're always up where they need to be.
Always upright. Mm-hmm. You're right.
And that's where you need to be to throw those kind of punches the way he's accurately throwing them, where you got Barkley swinging wildly, missing a lot, using a lot more energy than he needed to.
The problem with Barkley is he was a slugger. So he wasn't trying to outbox. His main goal was to knock you out. And all his major wins was by knockout. You never saw Barkley up on his toes using the jab. Fuck the jab. He had bricks in both hands, and he was trying to knock you out, which is not going to work against a guy like Kalambay, because Kalambay is not going to let a fighter like Barkley catch him. Now, Kalambay would be caught later on in his career. We'll talk about that. Right. But from a much, much, much more skillful fighter and a softball at that, not a slugger like Barkley. So after beating
which is
Barkley,
tough to say because this guy's great.
After beating Barkley, now this is where he was a huge underdog. His first offense was against one of the greatest fighters of the 1980s, one of the most underrated fighters in the history of the sport, one of the 5 greatest body punchers of all time, one of the most skillful fighters you've ever seen, the greatest fighter ever come out of Jamaica. If you want to hear more about him, go to our archives and go check out his greatest performances. This man was a ring general. This man was almost a perfect fighter. McCallum had everything but foot speed. Kalambay knew this, and Kalambay boxed a masterpiece in this fight. As for 12 rounds, he kept moving and moving and moving. Now, McCallum was not like Barkley. McCallum was not coming in there throwing haymakers. If you notice, Logan, this was a great tactical fight because despite the fact that McCallum lost his fight and lost several of the rounds, he kept attacking with that jab. He never stopped throwing that left jab. McCallum just kept throwing that jab to get inside. And Kalambay had to be on his A game because McCallum was trying to cut that ring off with his jab. Kalambay kept moving. He landed that jab. He out-jabbed McCallum, which is hard to do. McCallum has a great left jab. Kalambay kept moving, using the jab. And one thing I want to mention, Logan, the reason I believe McCallum lost this fight was not only did Kalambay come up with a perfect game plan as to move, McCallum's vaunted body punching was non-existent. You could count on one hand the number of body punches McCallum threw in this fight. He was trying to out-jab and outbox the boxer when he should have been going to the body to try and stop Kalambay's legs from moving so much. Kalambay was as fresh in the 12th round as he was in the first round because of McCallum's lack of body punching. My father and I watching this fight was like, body snatcher. How come he not going to the body? I mean, he's throwing his jab, and McCallum did land some beautiful right crosses in the 8th and 9th. McCallum, like he was taking over as he won the 8th and 9th round. But Kalambay came back in the 10th round and landed some beautiful right crosses and swept the last 3 rounds to win a decisive unanimous decision. Never understood.
He hit the body more than McCallum for sure.
Which is shocking. That never happens. McCallum is one of the greatest body punchers in boxing history. Now, he didn't make the same mistake. They fought again 3 years later, and that time McCallum went to the body to win a very close 12-round decision in the rematch. Had he done it this night, I thought he could have eventually either knocked out Kalambay or beaten Kalambay by decision. I never understood why in this fight McCallum didn't go to the body. Was he afraid because of Kalambay's movement that he would be susceptible to getting hit by a quick right cross or a left hook? Maybe. But McCallum has one of the greatest chins in the history of the sport. McCallum, you could count on one hand the number of times he was hurt in his career, and he was never knocked out in his storied career. So that was a huge mistake on the body snatcher's part. But kudos to Kalambay. He fought the perfect fight to beat a fighter of McCallum's ilk, a fighter of McCallum's caliber. And in my opinion, this one alone should put Sumbu Kalambay in the International Boxing Hall of Fame because he was the first man to beat Mike McCallum.
Yeah, and he said that this, though Barkley was the toughest fight for him, he said this guy was the best fighter he ever fought.
It's not even close. Mike McCallum was the best fighter that Sumbu Kalambay ever fought, the most skillful fighter. It's not even close.
Right. He said he was the whole package. He just had everything, and he did everything right. And you said his footwork was a little slow, but
that was the only flaw because he made up for it by body punching and that jab. McCallum never stopped using his jab, but he didn't throw any body punches in his fight. But that jab was beautiful. He cut off the ring by jabbing you, and then once he got inside, he'd go to the body. It was very rare that he was inside in his fight, but he could have still thrown body shots. He could have hooked off that jab. I was surprised if Eddie Futch had been his trainer in this fight, he would have went to the body, because Mike McCallum, throughout his career, kept fluctuating between trainers. The best success he had was with Eddie Futch. But in this fight, he didn't have Eddie Futch as his trainer. He had Lou Duva. And we all know that Lou Duva is he's more of a cheerleader than a trainer. Yeah. He's a great motivator.
He's like, come on, punch.
But that he in Duva's career, he would be the head trainer, but in name only. He would always have somebody else do the actual training. Georgie Benton and Tommy Brooks being his son-in-law, were his two main trainers that he had give the strategy and do most of the talking in the corner. In this fight, he's the head trainer, and that, yeah, baby, come on, baby, let's do this. You got him now, baby. Yeah. That shit ain't working, man. That shit ain't working. But that's no excuse. McCallum is a great fighter, and he should know. He doesn't need a trainer to tell him what to do. But in the rematch, Eddie Futch was his trainer, and it was a much different story. But I think even if Eddie Futch hadn't trained him in the second fight, McCallum knew from the first fight with Kalambay that he had to go to the body in order to win, and that's what he did. But McCallum was one of the most complete fighters in the history of boxing. He could beat you from the outside. He could beat you inside. Great chin. Was underrated defensively because he was hard to hit. He wasn't that easy to hit. He rolled his head a lot. He rolled with the punches, and he would make you miss McCallum was a beautiful fighter and one of the most underrated boxers in the history of the sport. I cannot say enough how great of a win this was for Kalambay. This was a great achievement. I mean, no matter what he did the rest of his career, he could always fall back on. He was the first man to beat Mike McCallum, and decisively. No controversy whatsoever.
Yeah, beautiful fight. Beautiful tactics. Like, just great counter-punching. You know, he would get through.
Yeah, because McCallum, when he fought a boxer, was very aggressive with the jab. So if you're boxing McCallum, and you're moving, you got all night, if you don't get caught, to counterpunch, because McCallum is not a quick-handed fighter, throws a lot of punches. You time it right like Kalambay did, and you can land and outland McCallum. That's what Kalambay did, because Kalambay was a very good counterpuncher.
He'd jab you, then wait for you to come in, and then you'd slip your punch, and then counterpunch you with like 3 shots. I mean, and he'd usually catch you with one of them. What does he do after this?
Talk about his next fight, the last fight of our greatest performances, November of 1988 against Doug DeWitt. Now, Doug DeWitt was a solid fighter, not a great fighter. You could say he's a good fighter, but one thing about Doug DeWitt, he was a tough son of a bitch. I remember when he fought Thomas Hearns. Hearns hit him with every punch imaginable, and DeWitt stood up. Doug DeWitt was like the Randall Tex Cobb of the middleweight division. You really had to batter him, and that's why this win was a great win for Kalambay, because he did what Hearns couldn't do. He knocked DeWitt out. You talk about counterpunching. This fight showed the counterpunching brilliance of Kalambay, because DeWitt's a brawler, so he's coming at you. So you're going to have all the opportunities to counterpunch him. And beginning in round 1, Kalambay, not only was he landing jab, he was landing that right cross at will the entire fight. I mean, DeWitt just kept coming, and Kalambay just kept hitting him. Every round was like the round before. He would just land one punch after another, while DeWitt, who knew he couldn't outbox Kalambay, was trying to knock out Kalambay. Wasn't going to work. Kalambay was a much better fighter. Finally, in the 7th round, he landed a spectacular left hook that put DeWitt down. Only because of DeWitt's toughness was he able to get up. But the referee saw he was out on his feet, stopped the fight. Kalambay retains his title once again with a 7th round knockout of the very tough Doug DeWitt.
Man, I'm now. Why didn't Kalambay ever fight Hearns?
That was a possibility, but at this point in time, Hearns had just got knocked out by Iran Barkley in June of '88, so that fight was off the table. But what Kalambay did was he couldn't fight Hearns because Hearns, after he lost to Barkley, moved up to super middleweight. So instead, after beating Doug DeWitt, Kalambay moved fought who everybody considered was the best middleweight in the division at the time. He's not going to fight Barkley again because he beat Barkley already. There's nothing to prove. Barkley's the WBC champion. The IBF champion at the time was a young fighter out of Davenport, Iowa, that everybody was talking about. They were talking about he was the next Sugar Ray Leonard. And we did a program on him as well. That was Michael second to none. Michael Nunn was this undefeated, beautiful boxer. And so they signed to fight each other for what was supposed to be a unification fight. But the WBA, because the alphabet groups still haven't changed, stripped Kalambay of the WBA title instead of recognizing his fight with Michael Nunn as a unification fight, which it just didn't make any goddamn sense. But in all intents and purposes, everybody knew that the fight scheduled for March 5th, 1988, once again in Italy, was for the
IBF.
Well, not only that, but for the
it was a unification fight.
And I apologize. The fight was in Las Vegas, and it was March 25th, 1989. I was living in New Orleans at the time, so I didn't get to see this fight with my father. The night before, I talked to my father long distance, and my father said, Nunn's going to knock out Kalambay. And I say, Pop, why you say that? I mean, I see Nunn winning, but I don't see him knocking out Kalambay. My father's like, Nunn's special A, and B, he's a southpaw. Kalambay's not going to expect Nunn's power. He's not going to expect it. So my father predicted a late round one-punch knockout by Michael Nunn. We weren't expecting a first-round knockout. I mean, he was obliterated. Kalambay was obliterated in the very first round. The minute the fight ended, my phone was ringing. It was my father long distance, laughing. I said, wait, Pop, you can't brag too much. You said it was going to be late in the fight. This happened in the first round. He was like, man, fuck that. I told you it was going to be a one-punch knockout.
He got caught, though. I mean, I think that was like a kind of an unlucky punch for him. I mean, it was just he got caught.
But you know what? Nunn was the better fighter. Nunn was a southpaw. Kalambay showed early in this fight that he couldn't adjust. And my father was saying that. My father said, Kalambay's a good fighter. He's a very good fighter. He possibly could retire as a great fighter. But Nunn is a southpaw with a great jab and underrated power and incredible hand speed. He said Kalambay beat Barkley. He beat DeWitt. He beat McCallum. These guys are all lead foot. None of these guys have great speed. He said Nunn's a different story. And he's going to come in for a rude awakening. And that's what happened. Nunn knocked him out with a spectacular one-punch knockout. And Kalambay, not only was he stripped of the WBA title, but he loses his chance at the WBA title. So Kalambay goes back to the drawing board, wins a few more fights, and gets back up to the number one contender spot in the WBA, where on April 1st, 1991, he fights Mike McCallum in a rematch for McCallum's WBA title. And McCallum fought very smart in this fight, fought a different fight than their first fight, went to the body, out-jabbed Kalambay, out-punched Kalambay to win a close split decision. I don't believe it was as close as the judges had it. The fight was in Monaco, in Europe. Kalambay's European. I mean, he grew up in Europe. So I think one of the judges, because Kalambay was the European fighter, gave Kalambay the benefit of the doubt of some of the rounds that I thought McCallum won. But McCallum clearly won the decision, and that would practically be the end of Kalambay as far as fighting for the world championship. Now, Kalambay had some great wins after this. After he lost to McCallum, he beat Harold Graham, one of the best British fighters of his era, by decision, to retain the European middleweight championship. Then he fought a guy that we will be talking about in a few weeks, one of the greatest fighters ever to come out of Ireland, Irish Stevie Collins. And he thoroughly defeated Collins by decision to retain his European title, and that was a great win.
Another great performance.
Another great performance. And had he not did what he did in the other 3 fights, this could have easily been one of his greatest performances we talked about. But for some unknown reason, he couldn't get a shot at one of the major titles. So he got a shot at the WBO title, which at that time did not have the recognition it has today. Back then, the WBA title was nicknamed the WB Bogus title, the W Bogus title, because it was always a lower-rated fighter that would win the title in that division, and that was the case in this fight. He fought a guy by the name of a British fighter by the name of Chris Pyatt. Pyatt was a decent fighter, but not as good as Kalambay. But the reason Kalambay lost, Kalambay was 37 years old and had lost a step, and he loses convincingly a 12-round decision. And so at the age of 37, Kalambay retires, and I got to give Kalambay credit. He never came back. He retired with all his faculties, and he's living a lavish life. He saved his money, and he's living a lavish life out in Italy. Still lives in Italy to this day.
Okay, well, we have a caller on the line, so let's see what this person wants to ask you.
Gotcha.
Caller, what's your name?
My name is Pianki. You know, I was just looking at your headline, and it said Sumbu Kalambay, greatest performance. I never knew him. And what year was he boxing?
Okay, he was middleweight champion of the world, the WBA version, from 1987 to 1989. And the prime of his career occurred between 1985 and 1995.
Okay. Well, I thought this was, you was open for people to name some fighters, but, and that's being that I don't know if you permit me, but one of the greatest fighters of that weight class I ever seen, Aaron Pryor.
Aaron Pryor was in the middleweight. He was a junior welterweight.
And the fight he fought with Alexis Arguello.
That was one of the greatest fights in history of boxing, and we've done 2 programs on Aaron Pryor if you go to our archives. We did a program on his 3 greatest performances, one of which was the rematch with Alexis Arguello, and then we did a podcast on the greatest fights in boxing history. His first fight with Arguello, which in my opinion was the greatest fight in the history of the junior welterweight division.
I agree with you, sir. That was all I can say. He was something else. But and you know, people say Mike Tyson's fights ended too soon. You know, you can have time to go get a sandwich, and it was all over.
Aaron Pryor, in my opinion, Aaron Pryor is the greatest underrated fighter of all time. He's in my top 10 all time. He could beat you both ways. He could beat you going inside. He could box you. In the fight with Arguello, he changed his strategy. They slugged for the first 5-6 rounds. But then when he started boxing, Arguello couldn't keep up with Pryor's speed, and Pryor was beating him from the outside. It was just a remarkable performance by a great fighter. The only guy that ever beat Pryor was Cocaine, because by the time Pryor lost his first fight, he was a crack addict. He was done. But Aaron Pryor was a special fighter.
You make mention of the drugs. Let me slip over to another sport. All-Can Boyd, pitcher in baseball. When he was smoking marijuana, could nobody hit him.
Yeah, he was on the '86 Red Sox team that lost to my New York Mets. I remember All-Can Boyd.
Yeah, All-Can was something else when he was on marijuana, boy.
He had a lot of talent, and but he self-destructed.
He did.
Like many athletes. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, thanks a lot for the program, man. It's really enjoyable.
Hey, go to our
Sure, man.
archive. We got over 300 boxing shows on our archives, and all of the greatest fighters of the last 50 years we've talked about. We got shows on Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Aaron Pryor, Alexis Arguello, Mike Tyson, Larry Holmes. We've got a 2-part, 4-hour special on Muhammad Ali. Check it out and get back to us and let us know what you think.
I sure will, sir. Thanks very much.
Hey, call
Okay,
anytime,
thank you.
big man. Thank you.
All right.
I'm glad he brought up as a segue into what I wanted to talk about as we finish off. He mentioned Aaron Pryor. Well, I've written several articles over the last few months on FightGameMedia.com, our buddy Garrett's website. The greatest junior welterweights of all time, Aaron Pryor is my number one. That's on there's an article I wrote about Aaron Pryor and his fights with Alexis Arguello on that website. He mentioned Alexis Arguello, his fight with Aaron Pryor. Recently published a couple of days ago on Fight Game Media is an article I wrote about Alexis Arguello, the second greatest junior lightweight of all time. So perfect segue into us coming off the air. Great call.
Yeah, go to FightGameMedia.com for that. And let's put him in perspective. Where do you rank him?
What are you talking about, Sumbu Kalambay?
Yeah.
Kalambay in his era from, let's just say, 1985 to 1995. Let's rate the middleweights. If we rate the middleweights matter of fact, let's go 87 to 95. Let's take Marvin Hagler out the equation because Hagler loses to Leonard in 87. Between 1987 and 1995, let's rate the middleweights. Number one would be Roy Jones Jr. because he was special, right? Number two would be James Toney. He was special. Number three would be Mike McCallum. He was special. Number four would be Michael Nunn. He was special. I will put Kalambay number 5 in that era.
And those were some of the fighters that he could have fought, like Tony.
Well, he fought McCallum twice. He would have gotten beaten by those other guys. Like there's no way in the world he could have beaten Tony. Roy Jones Jr. would have put him in the hospital. Tony possibly could have knocked him out, and Michael Nunn knocked him out. He fought Nunn and Graham. My bad. He fought Nunn, and he fought McCallum. He split 2 fights with McCallum. He got knocked out in the first round by Nunn. Tony and Jones would have knocked him out as well. So, yeah, he's not beating James Toney and Roy Jones Jr. Those guys are on another fucking level.
And looked like Nunn was on another level, too. So I see what you're saying. But, man, what a skilled operator, man. Just great body puncher, great jab, whole package here.
Now, he would have beaten guys like Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn, who I have below them at the middleweight, because he was a better boxer than both those guys. Nigel Benn was a brawler. Chris Eubank was a boxer puncher who didn't have the speed that Kalambay had. Kalambay would have outboxed Eubank and could have stopped Nigel Benn later on in the fight. So yeah, those and Gerald McClellan, who unfortunately got paralyzed in '95 by Nigel Benn in a great fight that we covered on the greatest fights in boxing history, could have had a shot at beating Kalambay. If Kalambay wasn't careful, that right hand by McClellan could have put Kalambay to sleep. But if Kalambay fought the way he fought Barkley and McCallum the first time, then he wins a decision against Gerald McClellan.
By the way, I just stumbled onto the Michael Nunn-Tony fight. That's a fucking great fight.
Well, we covered that on the greatest fight in boxing history. Yeah.
I know. I just seeing it now, like on my screen.
Nunn was way ahead until he got caught and put to sleep in the 11th round.
So, what do you think his biggest weakness is?
Kalambay? He wasn't a one-punch knockout artist, which is, with his style, he didn't have to be.
Accumulation, yeah.
Yeah.
But he had a chin, right? Or was he just good at slipping punches?
Well, no, Nunn was the only guy who ever knocked him out. He had a good chin. He took Barkley and McCallum's punches.
But he was also a pretty good defensive fighter in the sense that a lot of the punches would glance off him.
And he was always moving. So you were catching him at the end of your punch instead of down the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. And he would always circle around like a matador. Good ring generalship.
Because he got that great ring generalship. He had to have it when he fought guys like McCallum. You got to have it against McCallum because McCallum's so great at cutting off the ring that you got to keep him off you.
So he had problem with southpaws.
Which happened against Michael Nunn when Michael Nunn put him to sleep.
Yeah. So an underrated guy, not in the Hall of Fame, you say?
Unfortunately, no. If I had a vote, I'd vote him in. It's doubtful he'll get in. Remember, the International Boxing Hall of Fame is no longer 5. They've cut it from 5 to 3 modern fighters every year. It's the top 3 modern fighters. So many great fighters out there. Kalambay, if he gets in, it won't be till probably the Veterans Committee many years down the road.
And how would you compare him to Sugar Ray Leonard? In terms of style.
Sugar Ray was more flamboyant, quicker, do more combinations, and Sugar Ray was a better puncher.
But yeah, that would have been a fight, huh? That would have been, I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard would have won, but
Sugar Ray in his prime beats Kalambay, but it won't be easy.
Yeah. And Hearns.
Sluggers beat Hearns. Nobody ever outboxed Hearns. That jab of Hearns, and matter of fact, Hearns would have done to Kalambay what Nunn did to Kalambay. You would have had a right hand hit his chin sometime, and they'd have been cutting him off the floor. Kalambay's not a slugger. He's not going to be able to outslug Hearns.
Well, I mean, Sugar Ray beat Hearns.
Well, Sugar Ray could slug.
And he fought like a slugger in that fight, too.
Sugar Ray was a better inside fighter. Kalambay was not an inside fighter. He was a slugger. He was a boxer. Leonard could slug it if need be.
All right, man. I think we got this guy in the books now. So what's our next one?
There are several people. Let me see real quick who we're going to do next time. I've got several. I got a possible. I don't want to do Boom Boom Mancini yet. Let me see. I don't want to do Boom Boom Mancini yet, but Boom Boom is definitely coming. Ray Boom Boom Mancini is definitely coming, but not next time. I don't want to do Steve Collins, but Steve Collins is coming. I wanted to do somebody. Oh, yes. One of the most underrated welterweight champions of all time. Great fighter. Held the welterweight title for 4 years in the late 90s. In my opinion, one of the greatest jabs in the history of the sport. One of the greatest fighters to ever come out of Africa. Another fighter from Ghana, Ike Quartey, will be the next guy we talk about. Ike Quartey will be the next subject next week. Greatest performances in boxing history.
All right. Great choice. So Ike Quartey next week. Thanks everybody for listening. Keep strong and safe in this quarantine world we're living in. And we'll keep giving you the content. One Silva, thanks, man. Have a good one.
So you stay healthy out there in D.C., you and your lovely wife. And only time I leave the apartment is to bring my girlfriend food at Lenox Hill Hospital, as she's the real hero, as she's battling this disease on the front lines. Everybody out there, please. Logan, Friday was 65, 70 degrees in New York, and I was in my girlfriend's car. And there was people congregating in Central Park like it was the middle of July. Come on now. We got to do better.
Yeah, they're spreading it. I mean, New York's just fucking growing and growing.
Because of clowns
people
like
aren't
that.
Taking it seriously.
Riding their bikes and walking their dogs. Come on now.
All right, man. We'll get through this with some good boxing talk. So that's what we're doing. And why don't you tell people about the podcast that you did with, or that you're going to do with Garrett?
Yeah. All right. Sometime this week, I will be doing a podcast with Garrett that will probably come out Friday morning as part of his weekly Fight Game Media podcast, the Fight Game podcast. We'll be talking about the 2 greatest junior lightweights of all time. I did number 2, Alexis Arguello. That article is on the Fight Game Media website. Number 1, I won't say who it is, but he's got a lot of money.
There you go. I think we know who it is.
We'll be talking about those 2 fighters on podcast coming up. And last week I did a podcast, same website, Fight Game Media, where we talked about the 30th anniversary of the legendary junior welterweight unification fight from March 17th, 1990, Meldrick Taylor versus Julio Cesar Chavez.
Great fight. Okay. Juan Silva, man, thank you. We'll talk next week, man. Have a good one.
Peace, brother. Peace.
Peace to everybody. Stay safe. Thanks for listening.